In this video, I'm going to give you guys my review of the Shield Plus, but let me go ahead and give you some background on this pistol around the time that I bought it. So, when I bought this gun, it wasn't exactly new to the game, and when it was released, it wasn't new to the game, really. But there was already the Hellcat and the P365, and I was seriously looking at the Hellcat at the time. The Shield Plus, it didn't have the most capacity for the size, but it didn't have the least. At least currently, it's not in the category of having the least capacity for the size. I mean, really, you're gonna have to go to like single stacks for that. But it's very cost competitive. It's based on reliable and trusted design, and it's not really inventing the wheel too much. But we'll get into that in just a second. So it already has some aftermarket support, so a lot of people that have like sights or whatever, or some of the common upgrades will appreciate that you can still do those upgrades to this pistol. And overall, it's just a logical upgrade for the regular Shield, in my opinion. If you have the single stack Shield, it would definitely be a good idea to go to this one, just to kind of increase your capacity a little bit, even though it's, only about increasing it by like 1.5 times, at least in the flush fitting magazine. A little bit more in the reload if you care, if you can actually get away with, carrying this one with the increased, grip. So anyways, in my experience, when I first got this pistol, I was actually surprised with how thin the grip really was, and I thought it was going to be a little bit fatter, but I was pleasantly surprised by how thin it still was. And I do like the grip texture. It's not as grippy as the regular Shield was, so it doesn't really chafe up the skin all that much, which was a big thing that I had a problem with at first. I had to actually use the pistol a lot until like my grime and nastiness got all over the grip and kind of smoothed out the texturing a little bit on the regular Shield, the single stack that is. So the grip was a very good positive when I first felt it. So the next thing is really the trigger. I wasn't amazed by this trigger right away. I'm not really into the flat face trigger design. I feel that's just a Gucci idea. A lot of people are like, oh, it just makes pulling the trigger so much easier. You know what also makes pulling triggers easier? Actually knowing how to pull a trigger properly without moving the gun. Okay. Alright, so I come from that philosophy where skill overrides gear. The mission drives the gear, not, gear driving, your skill or whatever. But anyways, with that said, when I first got this thing and I started practicing, I had problems with this trigger because of the way that I was pulling the trigger. I actually wasn't getting this little dingus right here completely depressed all the way before I actually was moving back. It was partially depressed, but then it wasn't fully depressed yet before I actually had it pulled back and staged at the wall. So I had a lot of, I don't want to call them false positives, but I'm squeezing and nothing's happening because I hadn't deactivated the safety. Now, I think it had to do with like the spring tension of the dingus itself. It was a little bit stiff, but I'm not really sure exactly what was happening, but I just had a couple weeks of retraining myself on how to actually pull the trigger properly on this gun because of the way it was designed. I never had a problem with any of that on any other gun, even ones that had, safeties like this. It just boggled my mind. But anyways, I got over it. It just took a little bit of time, and I actually was going to try to replace this trigger with my standard Shield's trigger. So I tried to take it out and actually fit it in here, and because I was just going to put the old school Shield trigger onto this trigger bar since this trigger mechanism is different, and I could not even fit the old school Shield trigger in there. Not all the way anyway, so it didn't seem like it's cross-compatible, and I don't think it is. But I would be interested to see if there's an upgrade where I can go back to the old school Shield trigger, because I would still do that to this day, even though I'm used to this now. I still can pick up the old Shield and run it very well, and I still like that old school trigger design. But with that said, it's alright. I'm just not really a fan of the flat face trigger hype, but I was very happy that my holster and holsters actually work just fine with this pistol. And this is just a Harry's holster that I got a long time ago. It's dealt with a little bit of rust here, and it's been worn a good amount. And it's a very good holster design that I'm shilling for his company or whatever. But it is a small business, and he does a pretty good job. But I just don't care for the clips. Clips have always snagged on shirts for me, so because I'm one of those people who will dry fire 90 or 100 times for every live shot fired. And so if you want to look at a relatively accurate ratio, I spend a lot of time doing dry fire. So I went on holsterbuilder.com and got these things that will not snag. So they just come under the belt, and there's no snag point really. So I've rarely had any snag issues with these little loops, and they don't really cost that much to do the adaptation yourself. So I have that on pretty much every holster. So anyways, magazines were an issue right away because I like to have extras on hand. So I was thinking, well, maybe I can actually use the old Shield magazine as extra parts if this thing ever breaks down. Like maybe I can use the 7-round magazine springs for this. And nope, not really. It actually needs its own spring system. So eventually I was able to get extra magazines, and that way I could use the ones that came with the gun as training magazines since they already had a good round count. And I was able to take other newer magazines and turn them into my carry magazines after I broke them in after about 200-300 rounds of cycling ammo through them, and just to make sure that they were worn in properly and that the springs were worn in through cycling. But anyways, that was my experience, and this thing's had a few thousand rounds through it, and I've done a recoil spring change on it recently because I noticed that racking it got very, let's say, it got very gentle on racking. It was very easy to rack, which it was not the case at first. It actually was very stiff, as with most shields when you first get them, they're relatively stiff, and that's a good thing. That means it's going to have good wear life. Well, this one was unusually soft. So when you pull the pistol back, it should give you a fair amount of resistance. This one wasn't giving much resistance anymore, so I felt like it was getting ready to fail a little bit. But just want to show off some of that wear. I mean, this thing hasn't worn all that much, but I do love wear on pistols. So you can tell it's been cycled a good amount. It has been, worn. Wipe off some of that lubricant, get a good little look at that. But wear is just something that adds character to the gun, and I'm all about it. So that's just my little thing right there. Yep, one thing that I do love is seeing those wear points. But the funny thing is, it doesn't really show much wear on the top here. I mean, it has a little bit, but I don't know if that has to do with the finish or it's just different enough of a design to where it's not going to wear all that much in here. So, anyways, we go ahead and break this thing down in a way that's not going to get me demonetized because I'm just, showing. But anyways, yeah, right here in the frame you can see lost pretty much all the, finish on the rails. No big deal. That's a beauty. Love it. Love all the wear. I'll take all the wear. It's beautiful. So anyways, that's my review of the Smith & Wesson Shield Plus. I'm pretty happy with it. I mostly carried in this configuration. I'm thinking about taking a road trip in the future and looking at using this as the standard capacity, and that way I don't have to have a reload with me. A lot of people think you need to have a reload on you, but the justification for that is kind of weak. I don't hear very many justifications for that. I'm not an officer, so I do not have to confront a million people and correct crimes. So I gotta stay in my own lane, and I think having 14 rounds to deal with the situation is going to be, enough to handle it. But, that's my gamble. But with all that said, you know, it is what it is. You got to make your own decision, but my decision was to just go with a system that I trusted and something that was pretty much something that I knew already. So with all that said, let me know what you think in the comments below, and you guys have a good one.